This is episode 608 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to see, well, no, I'm not pleased to see Martin Heinrich. Well, he's introducing legislation. I don't know what you could put up as his big legislative accomplishment over the years. Certainly haven't seen many of those bills that he would be sponsoring and getting through the legislative process, but he has indeed sponsored a few concepts recently that I think it's safe to say would not necessarily be what his constituency would like to see. One of those bills got appropriately taken to task by the editorial board at the Albuquerque Journal, and it would have been to essentially make Puerto Rico a state of the United States. So long-term Commonwealth, trying to make them a state.
Okay, we nothing against Puerto Rico, but how many New Mexicans wake up and the first thing they think about impacting their lives and the quality of the state of New Mexico is, you know what we need? We need Puerto Rico to be a state. Yeah, that's the ticket. That is what we need to do. I don't know where that came from, Paul. That's that one is.
Oh,
out
I've got
there.
it. I can tell you
Okay.
exactly where it comes from. Puerto Rico is a left-leaning place, and the expectation would be that adding Puerto Rico would add 2 new senators on the Democratic side and add a few reps on the Democratic side. This is not about New Mexicans in any way, shape, or form. This is pure partisan politics, in my estimation. So,
is Guam next? I mean, you know, how far do we have to go? Maybe if they would do better policies and do a better job in Washington, they may be less worried about not being elected to a majority, the Democrats there in Washington. I don't know.
well, in the past, I've read enough history to know that in years gone by, you would have states added on one side or the other politically. So I believe when Hawaii and Alaska, of course, the 2 most recent states to be added to the Union, the expectation was that Hawaii would be the Republican state and Alaska the Democrat state. But the idea was that there would be a balancing of partisan forces there. It obviously did not work out that way. Alaska's among the more Republican states in the entire country. Hawaii is probably the most left-wing Democrat state in the entire country. But aside from that little tidbit, the other kind of question I have for Heinrich on this particular issue and Democrats, and Puerto Rico is definitely in a unique position because they are considered a commonwealth. So they have a member of Congress who does not actually vote on the issues, or they're not counted amongst those impacting the issues.
And does anybody know his name even in Washington? Probably not, because if you don't have a vote, what good is it? So
no, but we do support Puerto Rico, the taxpayers of the United States, in certain ways, because if you can imagine, how much New Mexico gets from the federal government, in part because of our poverty. Take a look at this. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, 41.7% of Puerto Rico's population lives in poverty. The next highest U.S. state is not New Mexico. We're close to the top or bottom. 19.7%, though, is the poverty rate in Mississippi. The U.S. average is 11.5. So you're talking about a poverty rate that exceeds the highest U.S. state. They are going to suck up even more federal resources if they become a state. And currently, they don't have an income tax, a state level income tax. They don't pay federal income tax in state of in Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. So you'd have to see some changes, but it basically would result in another kind of welfare dependent entity that happens to not speak English as their first language. Another major issue, I think, there. So, I mean, is this a good idea? I mean, I can argue that Puerto Ricans should be given the opportunity to either become a state or leave, because they would have to have a plebiscite on that and a vote and determine what they want to do, more than likely. So I don't see why this is a priority for Heinrich, aside from padding the Democrats' vote totals in the Senate and the House. That's it.
Well, and the other issue is the District of Columbia, whose license plates say taxation without representation, have always, not always, but in recent memory, advocated that they ought to be a state as well. So maybe they're looking for a twofer. I'm not sure, but it's certainly not going to balance things out. And the whole thing about as states were added to the United States during the time prior to the Civil War, they definitely tended to only allow states to come in a couple at a time, one Democrat, one Republican. And so there is a long, long history of that with regard to the United States. So I think, I don't know, it's smokescreen, but anytime crazy ideas get raised, sometimes they get traction. Hopefully, this one will not, at least just as it is. So.
Yeah. Now that's one proposal from the senior senator from New Mexico. The other is, oh, and by the way, New Mexico could lose congressional representation if another state or whatever was added to the U.S. New Mexico has 3 members of Congress. It's not beyond the pale that New Mexico could see one of those members go away if we were to add another U.S. state. I haven't run the numbers in terms of which locations are most likely to lose representation, but adding a populated place like Puerto Rico to the list of states and keeping the 435 members of Congress could result in a loss of political power for the state of New Mexico, which is kind of par for the course because Democrats here in New Mexico in the legislature voted to adopt the national popular vote, which relative to the Electoral College would also take political power out of the hands of New Mexicans. But again, partisan politics outweighs uh, your own kind of interest, it seems, when you have that dominant political power as the Democrats do in New Mexico. Now, the second bill is a $25,000 subsidy for home purchases by teachers. This is a piece of legislation. Strikes me as incredibly bizarre and odd that a U.S. federal government, it's $35 trillion in debt, would add a subsidy for the housing of teachers when these are teachers that are paid by their local school districts, local governments. They could increase teacher pay if there are issues there, and they have here in New Mexico for sure in recent years. Of course, education spending's gone up much faster, and that's a dynamic included in a chart that I put into this post available at Heirs of Enchantment, showing the change since the year 2000. The number of administrators has grown 88%. The number of principals and assistant principals has grown 37%. The number of teachers has grown by 8%. So the resources are being consumed at the administrative level, whereas the teachers' pay has grown slightly above the rate of inflation in most states, somewhat higher in a state like New Mexico, somewhat lower in some other states. But it's not that resources are not being pumped into education. Uh, they should be able to pay their teachers a wage that would allow them to buy a house. But if the federal government, as Heinrich wishes them to do, gets in the world of in a business of subsidizing favored professions, I think teachers obviously will get that subsidy per Heinrich. How about medical workers? You know, just pay for the costs of housing for medical workers, and especially in places where, like New Mexico, they can't find doctors and other professionals, farm hands, agricultural workers. Nothing's more important than picking the crops in the field, and of course, police and firemen. And there's numerous others that I'm sure are deserving.
State bureaucrats,
Oh yeah, absolutely. They would be
um,
right up there, I
City
think.
of Albuquerque. So, where does it go? How far can it go? Paul, this reminds me somehow. Many things do of economics in one lesson. So yeah, you get to see, oh yeah, the teachers get this benefit, but man, talk about an inefficient way to do it. That's just add more salary. Do we really need another program? And then you scratch beneath the surface, and maybe this is just a an effort to shore up the teachers union support for the Democrats. Because heaven forbid we would have housing policies that would, you know, help keep the price of housing down. And let's look to our neighbors in California, who sure wring their hands about a lot about the high cost of housing and homelessness, but everything they do drives it up. So where are we in all of this? But yeah, I do think that this one just probably is blatant politics. Because where does it all end? And then, at the end of the day, are we going to end up with this huge federal bureaucracy where at some level the federal government controls 5, 10, 15, 20% of the housing stock in the U.S., not indirectly like they do now with the mortgage loans and all that, but directly involved. So I will say probably not the best idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, where would this kind of thing stop? Because once you get the government involved, the federal government especially involved in just subsidizing one group of people for buying houses, I think you have a very difficult time drawing a line and saying no, no further. We're not going to do that. If this is a benefit and APS or other districts across New Mexico want to add this, we certainly have plenty of money going into education here in New Mexico. We've seen robust growth in the education budget at a time when the number of students actually in the classroom is plummeting, especially here in Albuquerque public schools. So the districts can prioritize that. Uh, at the federal level, it's just another handout, and that's unfortunate because that's about all the federal government is good at these days is just handing out our federal dollars to whatever group is most sympathetic at any given time.
Well, and they tend to be not anybody's dollars. They tend to be borrowed, printed
True.
dollars that is challenging the economy through inflation and a lot else. So,
Yeah. So next is expanded early voting is on now, and I encourage you to find a place to go vote early. Nothing inherently wrong with waiting until election day, but you should definitely consider getting out to vote right away at one of the early voting locations. That is, as the head of the Rio Grande Foundation, I don't ascribe anything special to my votes. I may be a little bit more well informed than many of the average folks out there casting votes, but I I don't wait till election day. I always vote early to make sure that my vote is counted. You never know what's going to happen. So, even though this is a primary election, or maybe even more so because it's a primary election, go ahead and vote early at one of those early voting locations. We've talked a little bit about what's at stake during this election. There is quite a bit at stake, maybe more than is even normally the case, although over, I would say, the past decade or so, as Democrats not only took power, but have consolidated power in the legislature, most specifically, we have seen a tendency for so called progressive legislators, left wing leaning legislators on the Democratic side, to have the wind in their sails and to challenge moderate Democrats, those that don't toe, especially the party line with regard to the governor, or vote ways that are contrary to the governor or the powerful left wing progressive causes, well funded causes. And those people have become under attack, so to speak. And so that is the main thing that is up for election on this ballot. As are New Mexicans, especially registered Democrats, going to continue to move their party further and further left? Obviously, at some point, hopefully, the voters decide that things have gone far enough to the left. But here in New Mexico, we're not sure where that line is, so to speak. It's continued to move quite dramatically left. I mean, as recently as just under a decade ago, Republicans had the House and the governor, and were 3 votes shy of a majority in a relatively moderate state senate. And in the last decade, we've seen a very, very quick and profound switch down towards the progressive left. And where does that end? We'll see if the high water mark is 2024. It could be, it may not be.
Yeah, and Paul, one of the issues that New Mexico has is that in many states, if education, crime, taxes are heading in the wrong direction, the state government feels it. They don't have as much revenue. Their revenues are shy. But here in New Mexico, where we have the oil and gas industry, kind of decouples bad policy from the funds flowing into the state government. At least that's been the case for more than a decade, and likely will continue. So I do think that is one of the issues facing us, is that we don't see from a dollars and cents point of view in Santa Fe the impact of a lot of these very progressive policies. Boy, they can sound good if you just don't listen too carefully to the details. But when you look in the real world, the impact of them tend to not be real positive.
The resource curse. Yes, indeed. Well, there's more to the story. Obviously, most of these races are in the House, while both the Senate and the House are up. And of course, those senators are up for 4 years, and that makes a profound impact. And kind of having those people locked in for 4 years. 4 years is a good long time in politics. So make sure you look at both the House and the Senate races. The majority of the action, certainly among the progressive versus moderate Democrat races, those are in the House, because the House was willing and able to stick its neck out this last session against the governor, and that's been kind of a trend in recent years. But of course, Republicans are running in primaries as well. There are some heated contests around the state on the GOP side. For example, Representative Jason Harper in Rio Rancho, District 57, Bill Ream in the Northeast Heights, the only fully Albuquerque-based member of the House who is going to replace him. And of course, it obviously could be a Republican. 3 Republicans are running for that seat, but it could be a Democrat as well in the general election. So that's coming in November. But Harper's seat has been a controversial one in that primary. On the Senate side, District 12, Jay Block and Candace Gould, county commissioner in Sandoval County, and Candace was a state senator for 4 years previously. Also, there is a race on to replace the retiring Mark Moores in District 21. Finally, District 42 down in Hobbs between Representative Larry Scott, who's trying to move to the Senate, uh, Senator Steve McCutcheon. Those are both Republicans. And McCutcheon was put there by a combination of county commissions and the governor. So those are some of the districts that we're looking at. Not going to impact, quite frankly, the makeup of the legislature in its entirety all that much, although there will be nuanced differences there. The Republicans just don't have the numbers at this point in order to, uh, kind of achieve any real impact based on one primary or a handful of primaries. And besides, most of the Republicans are pretty conservative. I'm not saying they're all among the same exact cloth, but there's not exactly a lot of races where you have people espousing kind of that very left wing, moderate Republican approach, at least not publicly. If folks are seeing that out there, that's something to let us know about. And we'd love to hear if somebody's out there really talking up kind of moderate Republican policies. I think the Republicans are by and large running as conservatives, and it's up to the voters to determine who they are most comfortable with electing. So we'll see after the primary election. And by the way, on the moderate Democrats, most of those score in the kind of zero range on our Freedom Index. A lot of the progressives score -50 or above. So a zero score is actually a pretty reasonable score for a lot of the more moderate Democrats, showing that they're voting with the taxpayers as much as they are voting against the taxpayers, whereas the progressives are much more inclined to vote consistently against the taxpayers of New Mexico. And so you can use the Freedom Index as a tool for finding out who those progressives and who those moderates may be. But definitely that is the story I'll be interested in the morning after the June 4th primary.
Yeah, it is interesting. This is probably as interesting a primary on the state level as we've had in quite a while because of the action that is going on the Democratic side to see whether the progressives overtake the quote unquote moderates or not. And then actually, heaven forbid, we've got some Republicans in the primary. So that's a rarity indeed. So a lot to look for this primary election season.
Yeah, and I would say that there have been other primary elections, including, I guess it was just 4 years ago when John Arthur Smith was defeated in a primary election. And that was, of course, impactful, but it was really more impactful just because he was the Senate Finance Committee chair, uh, while that unleashed or unlocked the tapping the permanent fund for pre-K by the progressive left. I think that that one primary had less overall impact on New Mexico public policy than will these particular races, because if somehow the progressives come through and win, oh, say 7 of 10, or and I'm not saying there's exactly 10, there's 9, 10, 11, basically, of these folks, but if the progressives kind of clean house and the governor gets her people in there, and come November, the Republicans do not move the needle, uh, boy, it is going to get even uglier than it has been around here. If, on the other hand, uh, the moderate Democrats win the day and maybe preserve 9 or 10 of their folks out of the number up for election, and then the Republicans come in and win some seats in November, I think, at least for the time being, this is the high tide of progressivism in New Mexico. So that's a big switch, a big potential pendulum switch here in New Mexico.
Yes, it is. And I do have a reason to watch the election returns, even that night. So,
Yeah, so that will be very important. Get out there and vote early. Not often. Uh, Next up is Food Truck Friday. Last Friday, I was walking around Albuquerque City Plaza and saw that they were getting ready for Mayor Keller's Food Truck Friday. Now, I love food trucks, they're great, a lot of variety and some really good food. Just happened to be walking by, and it's less than a block away from a bunch of electric vehicle chargers there on the Civic Plaza in Albuquerque. But these food trucks, and by food trucks, at least a lot of the folks that I saw and managed to take some pictures of, it's a significant trailer that is actually towed behind a vehicle. And not that anyone would be surprised by this, but you might imagine that the vehicle pulling the trailer is a rather robust vehicle. So we're talking heavy duty 8-cylinder pickup trucks or SUVs, the kind of vehicle that can tow these trucks around. No, no cyber trucks, no EVs charging and taking these food trucks around. In fact, even though there were charging stations less than a block away, there were a lot of generators there, Wally. A lot of generators in use to produce the food and keep things cool in those trucks for the people working in them. Fire up the electric grill, although it is an electric stove and whatnot. It just a lot of traditional energy sources going into those food trucks, and I do applaud them. They are small businesses and entrepreneurs. I hope that our politicians do not decide that they need a more aggressive step to destroy the food trucks, because food trucks are relatively sympathetic these days, and certainly they are businesses that provide a great food and great service in places where, like downtown Albuquerque doesn't just have a ton of restaurants all over the place. So it's got some, but food trucks certainly add to the variety, and they spice things up literally and figuratively there in downtown Albuquerque. But they do so with the help of a lot of traditional energy sources.
Yeah, maybe who was it? Was it UPS or FedEx that got the state grant? Maybe the food trucks will get their battery powered
Ooh,
food truck grants going forward. So, the key is that but power is power, energy is energy, and it does come down to functionality and cost. And you can do a lot with batteries, but if you're who knows 70, 80,000, 90, $100,000 food truck uh, goes up to $150,000, does that make that business out of the reach? Probably does, and that is the whole issue that we're dealing with a lot of these things. Is will the work technologically? Absolutely. What will they cost in the short term? That is increasingly an issue, particularly on things like this.
yeah, absolutely. And we're not done yet. In fact, the Guessing family purchased a new vehicle. Uh, Not quite,
A plug-in hybrid,
absolutely not.
hydrogen.
Now, we did look at a traditional hybrid, and I'll explain that. But I have 3 children, and we are still in the stage where we need the space that would come with a relatively significant SUV. We tend to take some road trips, and that includes not just 3 children, but one grandma, and that means a pretty significant SUV or minivan. And quite frankly, SUVs are a lot more expensive. Minivans are much more affordable. Our decision came down to a Honda Odyssey and a Toyota Sienna. Now, those are both great names, great vehicles, but the Toyota now has moved to exclusively hybrid. And I was I found out, was reminded, if you will, by the Toyota salesman that Toyota pioneered traditional hybrid technology way back in 1997. So that is a good long time ago. It's obviously a successful technology. It's widely used and very popular, but In our case, we were looking at a $10,000 premium for a vehicle that was both a hybrid and had all-wheel drive, and we felt like all-wheel drive wasn't really a necessity for us. Long story short, we picked the traditional gas-powered Honda Odyssey minivan, not the Sienna with the hybrid. The numbers just don't pencil out in terms of gas or fuel efficiency. While driving around town would be much more efficient with a hybrid vehicle, it's not enough of a difference, depending on gas prices, of course, and you're estimating here, but uh, the higher gas prices go, the better the hybrid pencils out. And uh, we've discussed whether that's a Biden administration and a left wing strategy or not. And it certainly seems to be something that they're inclined to keep going because they very much want to see the gas powered vehicles abandoned. But we did have the opportunity, not entirely the plan here, but we are 2 years out from when electric vehicles will be shoved down our throats by the governor to the tune of 43% of vehicles sold. So that was definitely looming out there as part of our decision-making process, not in terms of the hybrid versus traditional gas-powered vehicle conversation, but looking at and making sure we had the opportunity to buy the vehicle that we chose, not the governor of New Mexico chose for us as we chose that vehicle. Because as we ramp up that 43% requirement, you're going to see the prices of traditional gas vehicles probably go up. Neighboring states, oh, you're from New Mexico. Ah, yeah. No offense to any car dealers out there or car salespeople, especially, but I would think that they would be able to get a premium or get New Mexicans over the barrel a little bit if they chose to when they're selling those vehicles. So we went with the traditional gas-powered Honda Odyssey minivan, and yeah, it was a $10,000 savings over the hybrid all-wheel drive model.
Yeah, the other issue with hybrids compared to just regular gas or diesel powered is the battery life. And certain brands make it to where when those batteries need replacing, which sometimes they do 60, 80, 100,000 miles in many cases. From the last time I was in the market, some make it very difficult and very, very expensive to where if you need to replace the batteries in your hybrid, that's basically it. That car is not worth it anymore. And, this is New Mexico. If you lived in a city where, 6, 8, 10,000 miles a year was all you were ever going to drive, that obviously could last you 8 or 10 years. But, Paul, COVID aside, I can accidentally put 30, 35,000 miles on a vehicle. And, the brands that you talked about, if you have a Toyota or a Honda minivan, you probably can get a heck of a lot more than 100,000 miles over those, or at least that's likely. So a lot of issues to be had. It's not always the question of will the technology work from a hypothetical point of view, but does it work in the marketplace and practically for consumers? So
Yeah, it penciled out to about a 15-year payback on the hybrid versus traditional gas-powered price differential. And uh, yeah, battery life of a hybrid, just like battery life of any vehicle, needs to be a consideration. And obviously, I suppose I've never owned a hybrid, so I don't know if I assume you can continue to drive the vehicle on the gas engine if you have a bad battery, but maybe there are considerations to be made. You don't want to overtax that that engine, and maybe the car becomes somewhat less functional based on an old battery. But I don't know. Certainly, the hybrid technology has been out there a long time. You don't seem to hear the same level of problems with replacement batteries that some electric vehicle manufacturers have had on their hands. But moving on to another uh, electric and diesel engine situation, Bernalillo County, with the help of subsidies from the state of New Mexico, has purchased a Pierce Volterra fire truck, a pumper truck, at a cost of $2.1 million. And this is a backup truck, apparently. Didn't know they had such things. I figured kind of fire truck's a fire truck. Whoever's closest, go get them. But I guess this is considered a backup truck, but it's a heck of an expensive backup at $2.1 million. Now, this truck, which the governor and her environment department would have implied very strongly from their press release, was a exclusively electric vehicle. Turns out that it also has a diesel engine in it. That was admirably covered by the Albuquerque Journal Reporter and the Center Square, which we used in an article. But you could look long and hard through the New Mexico Environment Department and not find any mention of that pesky diesel engine. So one thing is the cost of this new truck, $2.1 million, seems a little on the pricey side, considering you can buy now, first time, 18 years of working at the Rio Grande Foundation, I've ever priced out fire trucks.
Yes.
But I did price out a Pierce pumper, lightly used, at a cost of $749,000, a 2021 Pierce pumper with 1,600 miles on it. Absolute showroom condition, as it says on the website. I'm not going to argue on behalf of this, but the difference between $2.1 million and $750,000 essentially is quite a significant one. You could buy multiple versions of a traditional Pierce pumper, at least if it is the same exact basic technology minus the double engine situation. So anyway, the point is that money is not an object when it comes to this governor and the state of New Mexico. No matter how harebrained the scheme might be, we're going down that electric path, whether we like it or not.
Well, and that is interesting that the quote, all electric, you have to have a spot for the generator to charge up the battery in case you're at the fire too long. Because the last thing you want, could you get diesel to a fire truck a lot easier than you could take the fire truck to a charging station? So I guess that's a good thing. But it is interesting how many of these quote unquote 100% green things have a little asterisk because just the last thing you want is a fire truck that's not reliable and not up to the job from a duration or a functionality point of view. So
Yeah, and and that's the thing, is that if you buy an exclusively electric fire truck, you know that that thing is only going to be used, and anytime you see it on the road, whether it's on its way to a fire or in a parade, it's under electric power. But when the eyeballs are not on the electric truck, are they really going to be using that functionality, or is this going to be just a diesel truck carting around an electric powertrain, et cetera? We don't know. Although one quote I saw in the either social media or the paper was that it'll only be used in the electric form for parades and other, kind of opportunities to show off that electric vehicle technology. But of course, this is, the price is dramatically different, and it's going to weigh even more than a traditional pumper truck, which is no small piece of equipment. This is a fairly significant vehicle we're dealing with. How much more damage is going to be done to the roads? Again, what other potential charging mechanisms and other costs will be borne? There's a lot to unpack here, but I think it is safe to say this is classic virtue signaling on the part of this governor and, to an extent, the Bernalillo County government.
I could not agree more. So we'll have to see. We'll have to track the progress of this wonderful fire truck. And boy, it warms my heart to know that when it's in parades, it will be in battery mode. That's great.
There was a chart that appeared in the Wall Street Journal, and I am going to do my best to describe it. It is making some waves, and I'm I think it does say a lot, but it may not say everything that we on the conservative right would like to have it say. So the chart is, again, from the Wall Street Journal. I believe it was Saturday or Sunday there, and it showed household net worth during the presidency of Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. And from a nominal value perspective, so nominal just being the number on how much your wealth is, your household worth, it's quite dramatically different in the Trump versus Biden, or actually, it's similar in the Trump versus Biden comparison. So far as it goes, of course, Biden has, you know, 6 months to go or so on his first term, but it's very comparable. Now, the end of Trump's administration saw a massive increase in the nominal value of your household wealth, and I'll get to that in a second. But uh, nominally, Biden is kind of tracking along there with Trump. Adjusted for inflation, uh, as it stands right now, uh, according to the chart, you're 36 months into the Biden presidency. So we're using 3 years worth of data here. Biden has basically adjusted for inflation, just gotten back above water. So household wealth under Joe Biden has has not been great. It's slightly above water. Now in Trump's administration at this point, he was in the 15 to 20% range. So significant increase in household wealth. Now there was a drop, and then of course you're talking about the early days of COVID, and then a massive just explosion in household net worth since the start of their presidency, in this case, Trump. And this is whether you adjust it for inflation or nominal value. Now, I actually, while I think Trump is by far and away the better of the two presidents, I do think that Trump played a role in the PPP and his legislation during COVID in spurring on the increase in inflation that ultimately took off under Biden. Biden's hands are by no means clean here. In fact, they're arguably dirtier than Trump's. But uh, I would not necessarily say that all of this household net worth growth is purely based on Trump's policies. It's kind of based on the fact that the federal government was handing out checks to people, and the impact of inflation was not being felt, partially because of just COVID lockdown. So people were staying home in that final, you know, what, 6, 9 months of the Trump presidency. The wealth was accumulating, and the federal government was handing out checks. So certainly the picture is better and remains better right now because Biden has allowed and encouraged inflation to grow rampantly out of control. But that last boost during the Trump administration, maybe a fiction relating to COVID spending and COVID numbers.
Yes, it is. It is interesting. You need to keep track of what's nominal and what's real because all dollars don't spend alike. And I think that was a good summary of what's going on. And the other thing is they do make a big thing out of inflation has dampened a bit, but boy, we had a huge run up. So there's a lot of things, housing, food, that are much, much higher than they were 3 years ago. And it's not like those are ever likely to go down, at least in the not too distant future.
Yeah, and it, it's very important to note that Biden has not done anything to address inflation, despite passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. It is much more.
Like most things, not most, many things in Washington, that I think the Inflation Reduction Act increased inflation more than almost any other piece of legislation in recent memory. It's like the fact that you can name something that when all it did was just created huge federal spending. That's pretty interesting.
Well, the Patriot Act back during George
Hmm.
W. Bush's administration, of the same ilk. It's a bipartisan issue for sure. But Biden, between his massive spending, his insane onslaught of regulations, and just the anti-energy policies, because remember, energy is a way that that obviously impacts directly. You have a line item in the consumer price index for inflation, and energy policy has dramatically increased the costs throughout the U.S. economy. And until Biden decides that he's going to be a pro-energy president, which is probably never going to happen, especially in a second term, we're just going to see those costs further increase inflation or further hinder efforts to reduce inflation. So Biden's right now at kind of this point where he's trying to massage the inflation rate lower, but he won't actually address any of the policies that got us there. So a lot could be said about inflation and the way it has been exacerbated under Joe Biden, but he's just spent way too much money and too heavily regulated our economy to successfully really drop inflation in a way that I think we would all like to see done. But we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.